I'm just gonna record and then we'll start the stream. And then I'll just introduce, you real quick and introduce the podcast, and then we'll dive right in.
Cool. Nice shirt, by the way.
Thanks, man. I got that merch. The tour was awesome.
I love that. That's one of my favorite shirts from this joint.
Me too. People always look at the back and they're like, yo, it's a lot of green. Is that what is that?
Yeah.
But I love it. It was I actually caught your show in Orlando. I happened to be, it was Orlando, sorry, it was somewhere in Florida. I don't remember where in Florida it was. But
I think it was Orlando.
Was it Orlando? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Sounds about right. Okay.
Oh, this is hilarious. Look at this picture I found.
That's a good background, man. Little baby Steph,
Oh, young Steph.
Yeah.
Man, we was kids right there.
What was he like when you met him? Was he cool?
Ah, super chill, yeah.
Yeah, you figure he's a good dude. Okay, I think we're live now. So welcome to the Mind Your Health podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mirhom, assistant professor of clinical psychiatry in Columbia University. And tonight, we got a special privilege, somebody I've been a big fan of. I'll even share a little bit that we met like 10 years ago when you went randomly in a coffee shop in New York, but we'll get into that maybe as time goes on. I want to introduce you guys to my man, Andy Mineo, gold-selling artist, inspirational speaker, preacher, hip hop artist, just an all-around awesome guy. So welcome, Andy. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Nah, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this podcast in general, man. I think it's just super important, the stuff you're talking about, and I hope it's helpful for more people, man. I
appreciate you, man. And one of the reasons I reached out to you is when I caught the show, as we're just talking offline about the merch here from fresh off the Neverland tour here. And one of the things that I thought was super cool was, that you even took time in the middle of the show, like where the momentum was going and the energy in the crowd. You're like, hold up, we got to talk about something really important. And you started talking about your own experience, and you even shared kind of having a platform in your show for something that you really cared about. So I wanted to just ask you, what made you want to incorporate that, not just to say, hey, mental health is cool, or like you could do therapy, but like to make it a part of your show. What made you want to do that?
Well, I think one of the calling cards for me as an artist, like why I think people are drawn to me is, obviously you give them hits, you give them bangers, you give them a good time, something entertaining. But also I think, my core fans really appreciate my vulnerability because they don't feel as alone, right? And I think that's the thing that always makes you emotionally connect with an artist more is, when you can relate to them or they can be a part of your story. And so I've always just tried to share my story honestly from where I am at the time. Not necessarily concerned if it doesn't relate to everybody, but the people that will relate will find your stuff. And so I was just being vulnerable as I normally am throughout my music and my art. And I wanted to take a second to set up a song and let people know where I was at and my journey with my own mental health, emotional health, the things I've been learning as I've gone through therapy throughout the years. And, I'm passionate about that because I feel like it is such an underdeveloped area in so many people's lives, mostly because of stigma or just lack of resources. And so Crisis Text Line is a platform that is trying to help in whatever way they can, particularly through text message, deal with or help people that are dealing with mental health crisis. So if someone feels like they want to commit suicide or anything that they would deem a crisis, they partnered with me, and I wanted to make sure that people would have a resource if anybody felt that way. Because you never know when these people come to these shows. I've had conversations with them afterwards that were like, man, I came to this thing suicidal. I came to this thing after the biggest breakup of my life. And you never know where people are. And so that's why I wanted to partner with them. Wanted to make sure I give them some time throughout the show and then tell people really where I am as a human. We're all having a good time. We're rapping, we're doing all that, but I want to connect with people too and give them some of that personal touch.
Man, I can tell you as a fan in the crowd who were talking to other people afterwards, like a lot of people were touched by that. A lot of people felt like, you know what, either they're going through it right now or going through a crisis, or they felt like, yo, if Andy could talk about it, like I can kind of talk about it too.
For sure.
It reminded me of one of my favorite lines from you when you were saying, you know, these are my trophies when people in pain quote, right? Like there's Grammys and stuff are cool and awards are cool, and you know, you're set up for all kinds of awesome awards. But to your point, like there's something profound when you can connect with somebody who's hurting on a human level.
That's right.
You know, and I feel like that is definitely a calling card for you. Did you feel like, have you gotten feedback from people like fans and say like, yo, you know, because of this, I reached out, or because of this like made an impact for me?
Yeah, for sure. I've actually, I get a lot of times I see these things on DM or through my text messaging line. So I have a community phone where I'm able to stay in touch with fans and people there. And so you hear stories like that all the time of people just kind of being given permission to wrestle through those things.
Right.
I think that's like one of the biggest things is when you don't have a map of how to navigate life, sometimes someone else talking about it can just be the permission you need to go there and feel those things or talk about them, you know?
And I think that permission that you're giving, it really hits two different populations that you speak to, right? On the one hand, maybe one in the hip hop world, right? There is this idea that, you know, hey, to be, you know, hard and to be gangster and to be, you know, to be like a real man, don't be soft. Like, don't be talking about mental health, you know, or, you know, even like in your video, right? Like be about it. And you had this tribute to all these artists. And one of them was, you know, was DMX. And he was one of the people that was more vulnerable throughout his career, but there was still a lot of stigma associated in the hip hop world. Can you speak to like, when you talk to people in the music world or people like in that arena, what's the stigma like there? Is it hard to sort of crack that?
Well, I think for rappers, you know, like I remember Jack Harlow came to the studio one time in 2020, like right before, you know, What's Poppin', all that stuff came out. And we were talking and we were talking about this very thing. And he was like, man, in hip hop, you just have to have this bulletproof confidence.
Right.
Is what he said. And I always remembered that statement because I was like, it's true. That's really like, that's the thing that sells you so hard is like, dang, look how confident that person is. So they always say like in marketing, it's like, oh, the artists that do well are the artists that the guys want to be and the girls want to be with. Right. So they have to like exude this confidence, this coolness, this all that. And so when you think about something like mental health or emotional health or whatever, those aren't necessarily things that tick those boxes for them. You know what I mean? And so most of the time it's like, it's not going to help my brand, my image, my whatever, especially in rap where arrogance and all this stuff is exalted. Like this is what makes you cool. So I think there's obviously a new wave of artists and people like that's not the only way. And I think they're going to eat up a fan base share as well. But I think that's some of the stigma that I find in rap is you got to maintain this hard image or this bulletproof confidence. And so showing your vulnerability, it's a hard thing for anybody to do, but particularly when you're put on a main stage and spotlighted and you know what I'm saying? And money's put behind you to look a certain way and all that. It's even more difficult to enter into showing your vulnerabilities, you know?
It seems like you're really intentional about trying to be sort of who you are, despite how somebody would define you, right? Like I know sometimes for you or Craig, you guys talk about kind of not wanting to be defined by one genre. Sometimes you're not Christian enough for this, or you're not mainstream enough for that, but just kind of being you. And it sounds like even though it can be tough, like you're still doing this thing where you're being you regardless of how you're supposed to be presented. Like, do you find that's been like a tough battle in terms of thinking about your growth and feeling like you want to be like the most mainstream artist ever, or is that not really the idea, just kind of being true to you?
For sure. Yeah, that's a tension that we haven't really been able to figure out, I mean, I always want to be authentically who I am. And so that's what we're banking on, is that's what has always built our fan base, is people are like, yo, I like what you're about, who you are. And so you do have this tension of, for me at least, of, I want to make sure that my music isn't just being compartmentalized or like segmented to like Sunday because some people see me as a Christian artist. And then some people that I'm being introduced to have no idea that I'm a Christian, you know, because they just hear Coming in Hot or another song, you know what I'm saying? So I'm in that interesting space where I'd love my music to service all those people, but I don't think I'm going to do anything out of character to try to attract one or the other, whether that's being overtly Christian in a way that's not true to me or being overtly, what do you call it? Yeah, like overtly like trying to attract attention from spaces in an inauthentic way too. So yeah, just banking on being me as being enough.
So far that's working. I mean, whether it's, you know, I know that we're coming in hot, like there was a time when even Braun had it on like Instagram, and that was, you know, that was really cool that you do have this appeal to people everywhere. But what's it like, let's say, when somebody doesn't know that you're a Christian and then they come onto your music, and then I don't know if you interact directly with people like that, or like what's the kind of feedback that you get from people who are like, yo, I just thought your music was cool. But like, oh, that's interesting that there seems to be a message behind it. You know,
For sure. Yeah, that stuff happens all the time. Happens all the time, and I think that's dope. You know, I heard a story one time. My buddy told me, he's like, he just found Coming in Hot or I Ain't Done or one of those songs. Then he discovered my back catalog, and he saw that, you know, when you get into an album, you know, you'll hear me talk about life, my wife, my faith, all that stuff. And it made him start digging deeper into the stuff we were talking about. And he ended up getting one of the arrow from my last album tattooed on himself. Wow. And he met my buddy Ray, started coming to church with him, and started exploring spirituality because of those things, you know. And so I ran into one lady one time at a hospital. She was a recovering addict, and she had found my freestyle, like me rapping on BET. Then went and looked up my music, found more stuff, and then she's like, yo, now I got married, I'm having my kid. That's why she was in the hospital. And that's what the People in Pain quote me, that lyric came from, was running into her. So it's funny, man, like you never know, just making good art can reach so many people. And I've never, or not never, but over the last 7 years, never felt the need to have to like be overtly explicit about my faith in order to have my faith be real to me. And I think that used to be a qualifier that some people would hold you to, is like, are you enough of this or enough of that? And I'm like, man, I wake up in the morning and I go take a dump like everybody else, and I don't, you know, I might not pray first or whatever. It's like you're living your life, you're a normal person. And sometimes I want to turn up and have a good time. Sometimes I want to pray. Sometimes I want to have a drink. You know, it's like I'm a human being, and there's many layers to me. And I think that's what I try to communicate in the music, is that I'm not just gonna be a poster boy for one thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and maybe that's more what people need too. You know, they don't need a poster boy. And there's that other line that I really like that you said, which is that, you know, Jesus saved us from Christians. You know, the ones who they forget, and like that idea of sometimes Christians can sort of be probably the biggest critics for a Christian artist, for somebody who's just trying to do good art. Have you gotten that kind of feedback from like the super Christian kind of fan base?
That's right.
You gotta say Jesus more in every line.
That's right. And some people want, you know, they come to artists for certain things, and that's okay, you know. But I think my fans come to me for the authenticity and realness that I bring, and it might not be for everybody. I'm all right with that, you know?
Yeah, and in a similar, so when I was asking you kind of these two groups, so one group is the Christian world in terms of stigma. Do you feel like as you're interacting more like in church and even like in your circles of friends and stuff, having heard kind of your journey about mental health, some people have sort of said to me, like, I'm a Christian, I'm a psychiatrist, and they'll say like, Mina, that's cool and stuff, but like, we really should be able to pray through these things, and that should be kind of enough, right? Has that been something that's been said to you as you've kind of spoken about your journey from a Christian world?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's like, I have heard those things. Yes. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that at all.
Sure.
But
Yeah, I'd love to.
yeah, I think there's obviously a place for Christian disciplines and practice. Like if you are a practicing Christian, like prayer and Bible reading and community and communion and gathering, all that stuff is like extremely good for your mind, your body, your soul. Um, but I think sometimes what can happen is uh we can use those things as a excuse to not venture deeper into maybe mental health. Um, you know, instead of saying like, man, if someone hits my arm, right, and like I hit an artery, I'm like, I'm not gonna pray about it, right? I'm gonna say my prayers. I'm not gonna pray about it only. I'm gonna say my prayers on the way to the hospital.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so I think I think God created doctors and information and science and things that we can use to help people get better. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't see them as like diametrically opposed. I see them working together, prayer and therapy. You know what I'm saying? So um yeah, I get a little weary of that because I think we might even be selling ourselves short, not seeing the totality of like God giving us these resources um, that are meant to work together. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely right, man. And I'll tell you, like, the research really backs up what you're saying too. That, not only do we sort of feel it, right? Like if you're got good therapy and you have good community and good spiritual community, it feels better for you.
Mhm.
But there's actually these thousands of studies that say exactly what you're saying. There's real research, real studies that show, no, this part is actually really beneficial in a similar way to what medicine can be, in a similar way to therapy. And when you really put them together and you really combine everything that sort of God has given you, all the resources, it goes a long way. It makes a big difference. So it's refreshing to hear you say that as well.
For sure.
Um, and I was wondering, sort of, so maybe delving a little bit more into your journey. I know you shared kind of when this happened for you, maybe first in 2016, and it was like the worst year you could remember. And how did you first know that, hey, this is like a real mental health thing? This is something that's bigger than just like, I'm having a tough day, or, it's been a tough week. What made
Mhm.
you feel like, you know what, I got to get some help for this?
I had a meltdown, so I had no choice. I was like desperate. You know what I'm saying? I was I don't know if anyone's ever had, who's listening has ever had like a full on like a panic attack and like mental breakdown
Mm.
where you can't see clearly, you're dealing with disassociation, the feeling of being outside of yourself,
Mm.
um like overwhelming emotion that won't leave for days on end. Like that is what I experienced for like a week. um and there's all kinds of books on this stuff, like The Body Keeps the Score. But what I realized was you can only push down emotional issues for so long until they come to the surface and manifest themselves in physical ways. Um, so I'll give you an example. This is like a moment that really made me realize our emotional self is just as important as our physical self. Our emotional self, someone would say like your spirit, the non-visible part of you, um, we kind of neglect that because we can't see it. So we'll go to a doctor once a year for a checkup because we have a physical body, but we don't go once a year anywhere to emotionally, mentally check in. Why is that? Well, I can't see that part of me, and therefore I don't value it as much. And we don't live in a society that values it that much. But I had this moment, a pretty spiritual moment just in nature. When I had finished a workout and I was doing this like Zoom workout with friends, and I was like, hey, at the end of our workout for a year, we did this. I was like, we meditate for like 3 minutes at the end. So you just stop, you're sweating still, but you sit there quietly and you breathe and you take time to be present in the moment and be grateful for life, all those things. So one of the practices was look out your window and focus on something and just look at it intently, not trying to figure it out or understand it, but just to observe it. And so we spent 3 minutes doing that. And I looked out the window and I looked at a tree. And as I was looking at this tree, I see it kind of like moving in you know, a little bit, and the leaves are kind of moving. And I just had this moment, this fascinating moment where I go, wow, it looks like the tree is dancing, right? But the tree isn't physically moving. It's the non-visible thing that's causing it to move,
Right.
which is the wind. And I was like, the wind is actually moving that, but I can't see it, but it's working together as one thing. And it was kind of this metaphor for me, is like the non-visible part of our body is in a lot of ways moving our body.
Right.
But you can only see this, right? So if you didn't know about wind, you would say the tree's dancing, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so it's that reminder for me, like when we first moved to Atlanta, the house that we first bought, it got robbed. Someone kicked in the door, you know, violated our space. Me and my wife came home and we saw like, wow, the door's kicked in, someone took our stuff. It was like traumatizing for my wife. The moment that they finally found the guy who did this, and I got the phone call, I went and I told my wife. And when I told her, she broke down emotionally. And what I realized in that moment, and I use this as another example, is to say, when I told her that this person was locked up, put in custody, like her body had a physical reaction to the emotions that she had been carrying around. So even though you would look at her, you wouldn't say like, oh, she's in distress. She's carrying something non-physical in her body. Right. At the moment that she knew she was safe, it was able to be released. I don't know if you ever watch fighters, you know, after they're in like a crazy battle and then they win, they raise their hand, they break down emotionally and start crying. Right. They've had to suppress that emotion for so long to be able to get through the fight or the journey that they haven't allowed themselves to feel. Finally, the fight's over and they won, and now they can let themselves feel again, and they get rushed with this emotion. Wow. So I say all these examples. I'm taking a really long-winded way around to say this. But to say that I had been pushing things down emotionally to focus on work and to work and to work and to work. And finally my body broke. And it said, you're not going to keep going. Actually, I need to take a break. And I remember even coming home and I sat at the breakfast table with my wife and I just started crying. And like, you know, it's like she gave me eggs, you know, and then I'm like crying. It was like, you know, these eggs are beautiful. It was nothing. It had nothing to do with eggs. And she was like, why are you crying? And I said, I don't know. Wow. And what I did is through research, I started finding out that your body will start releasing tears out of your eyes as a form of stress release, because it's holding on to stress in your body and it has to come out. So there was nothing that triggered it. It was just literally my body saying, I have to get this out of me. Wow. Because there's too much energy stored in my body on this emotional level. So it was these experiences and these moments in my life that really showed me the importance of like our physical and non-physical being need to both be taken care of. And that's the mental, emotional aspect of who we are. And I think religion is one form of people trying to deal with that non-physical version of themselves. And I think it's an incredible supplement for living a healthy life, to be physically and mentally and emotionally stable. But I was brought to a breaking point, which led me to start seeking out counselors and therapy and deep conversations with friends and spiritual leaders. And through that process, I began to go to therapy for like 18 months straight. And it was just life-changing for me. So sorry I was so long-winded, but I felt like to make that point, I had to take you all the way back.
Yeah, because especially, I mean, I'm glad that you did go through that, because I feel like the analogy or like the way to picture it is really important. Because a lot of times we can tell somebody that, hey, there's something going on emotionally and that affects your body, but the imagery I think that you're saying is really striking. It's something I'm gonna remember for a long time, because we know on some level that like you come to a point where you just can't hold it anymore, whatever that is. I mean, you mentioned taking a dump earlier. Sometimes it's got to come out of you, whatever it is. Something that's stored in can't be stored in too long until it becomes toxic, right?
That's right. I love how poop has made itself into this conversation twice.
Profound, baby.
Edit all of it out.
That's the real theological truth. I think it starts.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you know.
Your emotional state is like a heaping doo-doo. All right.
Yeah, isn't it always? And you just gotta release it. It's flush it out.
German illustration on 10.
No, but I mean, I think that again, that's why we're gifted as the scientific community with artists like you guys who can sort of paint a picture for us. And that's why I think for us, even today, being able to collaborate on this topic so that people can see, they can hear from a doctor, yap, 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 emotional health is important. But when they hear it from you, whether it's that breakdown experience or as we were talking about offline too, like there were different stages of your life that were really tough too. Like I think when your mom passed, that must have been a big adjustment too. And I'm curious to kind of hear from you. I know, you mentioned that there were people that you thought were close that weren't as close, right? Maybe when your mom passed, that somebody didn't slide, didn't hit you up, they thought as the way that you thought they would, right? Someone who you thought was a close friend and they weren't. What was it like just kind of dealing with her loss and kind of just going through that grieving process?
Yeah, I learned a lot through my mother passing, particularly about grief. I remember I had been starting to go through therapy around that time, and I called the guy who's working with me, and he's become like a father to me,
Mm-hmm.
And I said, man, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to grieve. And he says, well, Andy, what have you been doing? And I said, it was an intense moment, like I was at the hospital and like I held her in my hands like as she passed. It was like saw death firsthand from the person you love more than anybody. It's like it was an overwhelming experience. And I said, I don't know how to do this. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm with my brothers and my sister, or my brother and my sisters, and we're together and we're remembering her. We are eating food together. We're laughing at things that she used to do. We're remembering cool memories that we had with her. We're getting angry at her for things that she did. Like we're having all these feelings of remembering her together and crying together when we need to cry, all that. And he goes, you're doing it. You're doing it. You're grieving. And I said, well, is there like some process to that? And he's like, you're doing it. You are allowing yourself to feel and giving yourself to feeling. And I know a lot of people, like when someone dies, like their mom dies, like, all right, I'll be back to work on Monday, or whatever it is, that they feel like they need to jump right back into regular life so that they, one, don't have to feel anything, and two, so they can distract themselves with other things like work so they don't have to process that. And I think it's a huge disservice in two ways. One, to the person that you're grieving. Someone told me every time we cry, every time we shed a tear, it honors the people that we're sad about because it means that they meant something to us. So our grief and our sadness shouldn't be skipped over or buried, but that's a thing that we try to do, is outrun our sadness, because we hate the way it makes us feel and we don't want to sit in it or allow ourselves to process and feel it. So we run from it. Like, oh, let me bury myself back in work or porn or whatever your thing is. Food, the list goes on. It's a disservice to them and it's a disservice to yourself because you bury your emotions. And when you bury them, they come back alive somewhere else in your life at a different time. And your emotional energy, that is just that. It is energy. Like when we get angry and we want to punch something, the emotion that we're feeling is generating real energy inside of our body and it wants to come out so that we can be at equilibrium. When you bury sadness, it stays in you. And I that sounds like super spiritual because it is in a way, but there's some science to this as well, of like the energy that we keep from that's generated in our body. And I think that's why things like spiritual practices or therapy can be good ways to release those or come back to equilibrium. But um, yeah, the loss of my mother caused me to grieve in a way that I had never given myself over to before. And I think the reason why I'm able to move forward and live life and still miss the hell out of her and be sad when I think about her is because I stopped to allow myself for those days to really grieve. If you don't, I feel like you'll end up trying to outrun it your whole life instead of facing it. I think the reason people don't face their emotions is because they don't know how.
Right.
They're like, what am I? If I let myself feel this, I'm gonna die.
Right.
It's gonna be overwhelming. My head's gonna explode. My heart's gonna explode. Whatever. And they don't know that it won't explode. It'll be very hard and difficult to feel all those things, but it'll be better for you than to run away from it or to bury it with alcohol or drugs or whatever your thing is. So
I mean, that's really profound. I think the fact of having somebody to guide you in the process and just say, you don't have to outrun this. And some people will sometimes ask me as they're going through grief is sometimes for like a manual almost, right? Is that like, am I doing the right thing? Am I supposed to be doing whatever it is that's sort of expected of me in this grieving period? And just kind of giving themselves a license to grieve in a different way can be really like liberating. And it sounds like you were able to face those emotions and kind of go through them in their own time without feeling like you have to outrun them or without feeling like you have to be necessarily stuck in them either, right? Like you were still able to kind of go through the days and the processes of grief in a pretty healthy way. So I'm curious, I know you touched on this, sort of the spiritual, to ask more direct kind of Christian question. Like the role of your faith in the grieving process. Like, did you feel like you were able to see Christ in a different way in that grief? Did you feel like this was, his support was there in a different way, or, just kind of was curious about the role of your faith in the grieving process?
Yeah. I think over the last few years, 2015, 16, and like onward, my faith has gotten less, and this is going to sound like a bad thing, but it's not, less certain. So I have one friend describe Christianity to me. He's like, oh, the cult of certainty. And I thought it was funny because, when Jesus gets asked questions, he returns those questions with questions. The wrestling, the tension, like the name Israel, God's people, means to wrestle. It means to ask questions. It means to think critically. It means to feel. It means to go back and forth with God. And so I think early version of Christianity that I was a part of was very about like, we have the answers. We are very certain. We are reformed. We are whatever it is, the group that thinks that they're the most right. And I moved from that to a little bit more of a mystical approach, which is like, actually, I think God is infinite and all powerful. And that makes me less certain about things, but more in awe and wonder of God, and it made the lofty ideas about faith more interesting, but also the humanity of Jesus more interesting and how they both exist. Right. And in my grieving process, I saw the humanity of Jesus as something really beautiful to me, particularly the story of Lazarus. So the story goes as this: Lazarus was a friend of Jesus, and Mary and Martha were two women that Jesus was also friends with, and they were grieving at the loss of Lazarus. Jesus found out that Lazarus had died, and he made his way to that town to be with them. The shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. And it's profound because we know that after that verse, it goes to talking about how Jesus literally raised Lazarus from the dead. And what was profound to me when I thought about that in my grieving process is that, like, one, God never does something without doing it first, right? Like Jesus would never command us or ask us to do something. He shows us how to live by saying like, I'm going to do it.
Right.
So when he says like, die daily and take up your cross, he's like, I did that so I can show you how to do that,
Right.
you know, in a metaphorical sense. And he went in a literal sense. Even though Jesus had all the power to resurrect Lazarus, he didn't skip over the process of grieving. He went into it with them. So like and I'm thinking about that, like, yo, if I was Jesus and I showed up somewhere and I'm like, oh, I could raise this guy from the dead. Why are you crying? Stop crying. Lazarus, come forth, you know, like, but he knew he was going to do that and still stopped to cry with Mary, like to let himself feel sadness with her and to be there with her. It says in the Bible to weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn. It is an opportunity for us to be connected once again, as Jesus shows us, like our humanity of like pain is never gonna not exist while we're here on earth, because this isn't heaven. Since we're all going to experience pain, the best thing that we can have is to experience pain together so that we don't feel alone in it. And that's what Jesus does. And he's like, I'm not skipping over this. And that was profound to me, and a reminder to me that like I should do as Jesus did and allow myself to weep, allow myself to cry. And, you know, I have a lot of qualms with like American Christianity, but I have very few with Jesus. And for those exact reasons, when I look at the Bible and I read about Jesus, those are the things that blow me away and make me say like, I want to follow this guy. He's onto something. You know what I mean? So.
In some ways, even the weeping is as profound a miracle as the raising from the dead, right? Like he's done a lot of fancy miracles where you could do, you know, feeding people or raising people, but maybe even his vulnerability in that moment and giving us almost like a portal of pain, right? Like pain is going to exist for us, but he sort of transformed pain to be a way to connect with him, to have communion with him in a way that was never possible before. God was still distant enough. God is impassible, right? Like you're saying, this mystical God of the universe who's high on a mountain, and then here is this God who weeps. And that's maybe something that's incredibly powerful and liberating for us as we're going through sort of pain and grief. So thank you for sharing that, like, account, how you see that.
For sure.
So I mean, I know we're sort of talking about heavy things here, and I know it wasn't all, you know, grief and sort of difficulty as well. I was curious, sort of on the flip side of things here. I know, in contrast to maybe American Christianity, or in contrast to like the perception of what a Christian artist would look like, you were saying you try to just be kind of more human and more yourself. To someone maybe who's not as familiar with like what it means to be a Christian, right? Or what the expectations are to like live a Christian life. How do you sort of present the fact that you're just a normal person and your faith is important to you and it doesn't make you weird, right? If somebody's like asking you, like if I was similar to maybe when you ask your therapist, like, I don't know how to do this grief thing. Someone says, Andy, like, I don't really know how to do this like Christian thing. Like, it sounds interesting. Jesus seems like a nice guy, but I don't really know how to do this thing. Like, what would you sort of say to somebody who's exploring like
I don't know how to do it either. And I'm trying to figure it out as I go. And that's the beauty of following Jesus, right? I think the way that we kind of understand it from like a cultural perspective is like, I'm this way, and now I say I want to follow and learn the teachings of Jesus, and now I got to be this way. And it's like a separation completely, and there's that's it. What I actually think the process of becoming a follower of Yeshua, of the way of Jesus, is to take one step at a time in that direction and to learn. I think the perception is like, now I need to behave like, I need to act like this. I need to do all these things. And we don't really give room for people to wrestle or to journey or to ask real questions. And so what we get left with is this kind of like very shallow and hollow version of Christianity that most people think is Christianity, and it's not. It's this like Pharisaical pretending, acting like we got all of our, crap together, instead of like, I'm openly walking and wrestling with God and working through these things and trying to think different. And so I think it's a process to journey with God that you're welcome to get on board with. That's what I would invite people to. Like, we have a group of guys, like we get together on Wednesdays, sometimes on weekends, and we journey and wrestle with these things. And people are in different places in their spiritual walk, but nobody in there is going, yo, I'm the one who's got it all together. Now I can teach all of you how to do it. And that's the beauty of authentically walking with God. It really is frustrating when, this weird cultish version of Christianity that we see as like American evangelical industrial complex, is like, we're supposed to churn out people to behave a certain way and look a certain way, even if they don't understand what they're doing, or give them room to wrestle with it. And it creates this weird cultish thing. And so it really is frustrating and sad that most people's idea of Christianity is that, as opposed to a ongoing journey to walk with God and to walk humbly before him and learn and ask questions and that. So I think that's more accurate. And that's what I would invite people to. It's like, I don't know how to do this. It's like, join the party of a community of people that are trying to do that together. And sometimes you can find that in churches. Sadly, sometimes you can't. But the internet allows us to connect with a lot of people. And even in your local communities, I think when you lead with vulnerability, you receive vulnerability back. So I'd walk in and be like, I'm wrestling, I'm struggling with these things. I want help. Can anybody relate? And see if anybody will meet you there. I don't know. That's a complex one, man.
That's a great answer, because of all the times I've spoken with people who are maybe searching, I've never heard someone say, this one group that was inviting me to like ask questions and sort of go through a process, that really turned me off. What really turns people off most of the times that I've sort of heard people say, like, if I asked a critical question, they made it seem like I was some super atheist and I'm not welcome here, right? If I used my brain, and it's like, hey man, why are you questioning facts? And very few people, as you probably have gotten this too, as you said, like very few people have said, I have serious issues or qualms with the person of Jesus, right? People have just said, hey, like, this doesn't seem like an inviting process, or this doesn't seem like a process that lets me kind of go through things in my own time. So what you're saying actually sounds really refreshing to people.
Yeah. I just wish there was more of that. I think also like a great place for someone to start is like to write down your questions, ask your questions. We got a guy in this group that comes, he kicks it with us, and he's like, yo, I don't know about fasting, and might just share like, I don't understand it. Well, let's talk about it. Why is it important? Is this like, oh, I sense God? It's like, nah, it's you're starving and your brain isn't working right because you don't got food. So I don't understand. How's this work? And we love it because it's like, bro, we should be asking these questions. If your faith is going to be real and authentic, then don't just be like, oh, I better get in line and say yes and amen to everything, even if I don't agree with it or understand it. That's not real faith. That's being a sheep. That's like just going along with things that you don't understand. Like, that doesn't even make sense. So I think if people know that they can openly wrestle and walk with God like that, I think that's a refreshing and hopefully encouraging for them to press in and not pretend.
Yeah, and I think as people are wrestling, so one of the themes, that you sort of get into in different songs too, is, let's say, as somebody begins to sort of get deeper, whether it's their faith relationship with God, or just sort of how they see the world in general, right? Like, there is a general idea, sort of for us in the West, that the goal of life is to be like as comfortable as possible, right? Like to do everything you can so that you can avoid any kind of pain or discomfort. And there's a great line where you say, like, I didn't know that you could die from bliss, right? You can be so comfortable and so chilling, whether you're a Christian or you're just a regular person going around. What's the lulling danger of bliss, or to sort of sit back and have it all and be as comfortable as possible. Why is that something to be aware of?
Yeah. I think comfort is something that we all look for, right? We want to be physically, emotionally comforted. And like, I don't think it's inherently wrong. I think we have to be cautious of like living a life that is explicitly about our comfort, because what I think it does is it makes our world and our minds very small, because it makes us only centered on ourselves. And we as human beings belong to something much bigger than ourselves, which is the human race, right? Like we live on and with a living planet, right? So like to be in harmony and in relationship with that is to think outside of yourself. Like I want to take care of the planet because I live here, and my life is not just about me. There's other people that are going to have to enjoy this place when I'm gone. So it expands your mind to think bigger. It also allows you to think about other people, and sometimes to experience discomfort to bring comfort to somebody else. I think that is a big and meaningful life. I think a life that is completely self-centered and focused and only in the pursuit of comfort is one that is going to be ultimately unsatisfying. And, that's where I'm placing my bets when it comes to how life is going to, like what I'm going to think at the end of it. Some of the dangers of comfort is that, I mean, and there's like real physical examples, like discomfort typically is healthy for us, even in a physical sense. And I've found that the physical and the supernatural, the spiritual kind of intersect like that. There's a lot of spiritual lessons in physical things. So it's painful and it sucks sometimes when you go jogging, and it's good for you as well. When you work out and you feel the strain, but you grow stronger because of it. I think those are all like universally true principles.
Yeah, and it sounds like that also ties into what you're saying, even the discomfort from like a mental health standpoint. There are these foreign, right? These foreign and uncomfortable emotions that just feel like, as you said, like if I approach them, my head's gonna explode, right? It's such a territory that's unknown that if I touch it, I don't know what it's gonna do to me. Like people feel that way when they come see a shrink for the first time. It's like, what's gonna happen here, right? Like how deep are we gonna go into my like heart or my emotional life that like it's gonna be terrifying. But
and it's gonna make me uncomfortable, so I don't want to do it. So I'd rather not access that and live at a lower capacity of my emotional capacity than to do the hard work of going into that. And I understand it.
Right.
Like I understand not wanting to go to the gym. I understand not wanting to do the hard work to make yourself better. I understand it. I just don't think it ultimately is going to get people to a place that they're going to be happy about. And that's that, live your life, do whatever you want. I'm not here to shame anybody, but that's my perspective on the whole thing. Is I think the discomfort is often what's going to make you grow and make you better. And I think that's universally true.
Yeah, maybe just as you're saying, seeing what's on the back end, like the potential of,
for sure.
Obviously, you can know sort of, you go to the gym and you get better health. That's something good. Maybe if you could speak for a second to having gone through a lot of these processes, and I mean, just hearing you, you're an emotionally mature person, who's kind of worked through a lot of these things. If you were to tell somebody, here's sort of the potential benefit, right? Here's why you could take that first tough step, because here is the reward. Could you speak a little bit to the reward of like emotional maturity, how this impacted maybe your relationship?
Absolutely. Every single aspect of relationships in my life has improved by me becoming more healthy. I am a better husband. I think I would be a better father if I had kids. I am a better friend. I am a better worker, songwriter. I am a better boss and employer because I have done the work, and I continue to do the work of trying to grow or understand myself emotionally. There's one person you're going to live with your entire life, and it's yourself. And you take you with you everywhere. So to not understand how you work or you tick or what's happening inside of you is literally psychotic. It's like, why would you not want to know the person that you have to be with every single day? Because when you know that person, you learn to love that person and you have access to that person, then you can give it to somebody else, like in marriage or in having a kid or being a father, or being a, whatever it is you want to be, a friend. Everything improves because of that. Because now if me and my wife get into an argument, I have tools that I can access to work through that argument. If my friends, I'll give you an example. In my early 20s, I had a friend tell me, he's like, yo, I'm having a kid, right? Like an unexpected kid, this is going to change his life. And he started crying in my arms. And because I didn't know how to deal with his grief or his sadness, I just awkwardly was like patting his back, like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. What I was trying to do was like make him stop. It's okay, man, it's gonna be okay. I'm trying to shush down his moment of being vulnerable and really what I should have done is just cried with him.
Right.
And entered into that feeling with him. I would have had the emotional capacity now to just sit the way I did with my godson recently and be able to cry with him and then be there with him and not have to rush out of the thing so that he could feel safe. That's making me a better person for the people that I love the most. And I think if you want that in your life, I think it's the work is necessary to do, because ultimately you will benefit and so will the people around you.
I can't think of a better note to end on here, Andy. Like a mic drop.
Yeah.
It's so profound, man. I'm so grateful to you, man, for having the courage to go through that journey and for having the courage and vulnerability to share that with us. I mean, it's inspiring, bro. I mean, thank you so much.
Man, it's my pleasure. I'm grateful that you're having these conversations and I'm glad I could contribute in any way. Yeah, thanks again, brother.
I appreciate you.